All right, so we're back here on another special Couch Coach Live where we're continuing our five-part series of our Power Five recaps in college football. Of course, I got my guy Zach from the Blue Bloods. What's going on, Zach?
Not much, man. Not much, man. Happy to be here again. I'm looking forward to talking some Big 12 today.
Yes, indeed. We're going to talk about the Big 12 Conference, and obviously, Oklahoma was the winner in this division, and definitely huge shout out to the Sooners. And so, without further ado, let's get it going. So, who was the MVP of this conference?
Man, I feel like there's one obvious answer. I mean, outside of maybe our SEC preview, I don't think there's an easier conference to deem an MVP, and that's Barisi Hall, running back Iowa State. I mean, he was the best running back in the country this year. I think he's above Etienne. I think he was above Najee Harris. This kid was a baller this year. Over 1,500 yards rushing, man, 23 total touchdowns, averaged over 5.5 yards per carry in only 12 games, all Big 12 schedule. That's just an outstanding production for probably arguably the toughest season any of these players have had to go through. He was top 6 in the Heisman race, the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He led the country and the conference in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and was third in the country in yards from scrimmage, led the Big 12 there too. He broke 5 Iowa State records this year this season, only as a sophomore. He's a true sophomore. Last year was his true freshman season. He's the first player since LT, LaDainian Tomlinson in 2000 to rush for 75 plus yards and a touchdown in all 12 games of a season. That's elite company if you're up there with LT in any statistical category. And, he's only the second Iowa State player to win this award, and he was one of my potential breakout stars on the Blue Bloods we released on our website, people to watch, and he was one of them, but I don't even think I saw this coming. I mean, this kid took it to the level I thought he could reach, and another one, if we had to put it there. And next year, man, he's coming back. He gets a third year to play because he's a true sophomore, so he couldn't go anywhere. So we're going to see this kid again. Iowa State's returning, I think it was 20 starters from this team this year. And so this team's going to be real tough to beat next year. There should be top 12 preseason stuff. They went out there in the playoffs, and I think Hall, and I think he does currently, has the highest odds to win the Heisman next year. And I am excited to see this kid play. And if you're listening and didn't see this kid's film, go check it out because this kid is going to be a problem in the NFL and next year. And, I came on this show 2 days ago, and I told you I do one offensive and one defensive, and I didn't plan for this to happen, but my defensive one comes from the same school, man. It happened to me again. Mike Rose, linebacker, Iowa State. He was the defensive player of the year in the conference this year. He came in as a junior, one of the leaders of this team. He's an All-American this season, 99 tackles in a shortened season, man, 10.5 for loss, 2 sacks, 5 INTs, some pass breakups. He increased his tackles by 22 tackles in less games this year. I mean, if to improve that much blows my mind. He was first in the Big 12 in tackles, total tackles, and INTs. To lead a conference in tackles and INTs shows this kid's versatile, and I think he's one of the most. He's the toughest, most physical and athletic linebackers in the country, and he hasn't announced. This is one of the dudes that's kind of up in the air. If he comes back, Iowa State should be a national championship contender next year.
Yeah, like you're saying, Iowa State, because they were in the conference championship game, and essentially, if Oklahoma didn't come back, what was it, like a 17 points in the fourth quarter or something of that nature? Yeah. And you look at that, and you're like, and they're bringing everybody back. I mean, when you think about 20 out of 22 starters, wow,
it's tough, and especially when you bring a quarterback, and Brock Purdy already has 3 years of starting experience. So you got a 4th-year starter back there who just came off his best season. Man, you got to give it up to the Cyclones there. I mean, and Matt Campbell, the job he's done at that job, I think gets overlooked because I don't think anybody who really pays attention to college football before Matt Campbell got there really thought of Iowa State as anything more than a middle of the road, kind of one of those teams on your schedule you got to play average and you can usually beat. And he's got this team in the top 10 back-to-back years now.
Yeah. That's going. Yeah. That's So a lot of things going down in Ames,
Yes,
Iowa. Yeah, big
absolutely.
time, big time. So in this conference, who was your biggest surprise?
We're gonna stick with it right now, man. It's got to be Iowa State. I had them finishing fifth in the top five for the Big 12, and they won the regular season title. They actually beat Oklahoma in their head-to-head matchup in the regular season, and they won the regular season title. They were the home team in the championship game, and the limitation coming into the season, the thing that made them a surprise is Brock Purdy, the quarterback. He started as a true freshman and sophomore, so he was very inconsistent. He turned the ball over all the time, and you can't win in the Big 12 like that, especially when you have Oklahoma quarterbacks throwing for 50 touchdowns a year. And Jalen Hurts had like 2 turnovers his entire career. You got to keep the ball away from that offense, and that's where they struggled. This year, 19 passing touchdowns, over 2,700 yards, and those problems turned into strengths for him finally, and it all clicked. Then look at the award circuit, man. You got to look at this. I mean, offensive and defensive player of the year for the conference. They had the offensive newcomer of the year in Xavier Hutchinson, their sophomore wide receiver. Defensive freshman of the year in Esom Young as on the D line. They had 9 first-team All-Americans in their conference on offense and defense. They had 2 second-team guys and 13 honorable mentions. That's more than the entire starting lineup on offense and defense is how many players got at least mentioned for All-American in this conference. And it's a tough loss, man. I don't know if you remember, they lost to Louisiana Lafayette week 1, 31-14. And Brock Purdy came apart. Matt Campbell was on the hot seat, and everyone thought the season was over. And then after that, they go out to win 8 of their last 9 games. And their only loss was a 3-point loss on the road to that time, number 6, Oklahoma State, by 3 points, 24-21. They were resilient. They were tough. The drive defined this team this year because I don't know many teams that can lose to a team like Louisiana Lafayette and turn it around like they did. And then as the season went on, you saw Louisiana Lafayette was a top 15 team at times this year.
Yeah.
So that loss looks better and better. And you look at that score, 31-14. They had 2 punt returns and a kick return. It's like that game was a lot closer than many people look back at the box score and like, we got blown out. It's like they really didn't. They were leading, and then their special teams gave it away. Then they end their season with a win over the Pac-12 champion Oregon Ducks in the Fiesta Bowl. They end off 9-3. I mean, there's so many players that were good, but looking at where Iowa State was this year, there was no other pick here for the biggest surprise in this conference other than this entire team. Because when you have, 24 players get mentioned in an all conference selection, man, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like you said, it was such a banner year for this team, and definitely 2020. The sky's the limit for this team, big time.
It's going to be interesting, man.
Yeah. So, who was your breakout player in this conference?
I actually took a different approach here. I got 2 defensive players. I know a lot of people don't like talking defense. I love defensive football. Tony Fields the second is who I want to talk about first. He was a transfer linebacker from West Virginia. His senior year here, transferred over from Arizona out of the Pac-12 after they let their head coach go. 88 total tackles, 4 for loss, a sack, an INT, 2 pass breakups. He did that in only 9 games. They had a few games canceled due to COVID. So 9 games, almost 100 tackles. If he would have had a full season, it would have been his second consecutive 100 tackle performance in his career. He was the defensive newcomer of the year, first team All-American, first in assisted tackles in the conference, and third in total tackles. The kid put up major output. And if anyone who watched Big 12 football this year was so impressed, West Virginia had the number 1 ranked defense in the country in the middle of this season. They were only allowing about 250 yards per game. In the Big 12, where, as we all know, the rumor is offenses reign supreme. They were doing it completely differently out there. He was a huge part of this revitalization of this defense, and I'm excited. He got invited to the combine. He was not projected to be a draft pick. He got an invite to the virtual combine this year. That shows how much he improved his stock. I'm looking for him to be a 3rd, 4th round pick, but he's gonna be a steal of the draft for somebody. So if your team needs a linebacker, Tony Fields the second is someone you need to really, really look at there. And I mentioned this next guy on your podcast, however many months ago, man. We talked about him for like 15 minutes. Trayvon Moehrig out of TCU, the safety. I said that he was a player y'all had to watch. Listen, I couldn't even tell you how well this kid played this year. I mean, he won the Jim Thorpe Award as the best secondary player in the entire country. That's the level of output he put out. He was first team all Big 12, of course, and he was 47 total tackles, 2 for loss, 2 picks, 9 pass breakups, and a touchdown. He only allowed 48% completion percentage in coverage this year, and he only allowed a total of 200 yards the entire season against him. And this kid can step down in the slot. He can move outside. He can play safety. He's even big enough to come down and play outside linebacker. He's so versatile. This kid reminds me of Antoine Winfield Jr., who plays for the Buccaneers now. He was out of Minnesota. This kid's that dynamic. And against 2 pass-heavy teams, Oklahoma and Texas Tech this year, 0 catches allowed on 6 targets. That's balling out against 2 of the most pass-heavy teams in the whole country. Yeah. And I think he's going to be a top 3 safety in the draft, and he's going to be an instant starter for somebody at the next level. And these 2 guys deserve all the credit in the world. But Moehrig, the kid was arguably, I know Mike Rose and Barisi Hall were, the best players in the conference. This kid was a close third by far.
Yeah, big time, big time. So, who was the biggest disappointment in the Big 12 this year?
This one's going to come as, I guess, a shock for not a shock for people who listen to the Blue Bloods, but people who don't listen to the Blue Bloods, probably a huge shock. I got a team and a player. The Texas Longhorns got to be the disappointment of the season, man. I mean, all that talent, and you can't win the Big 12. You can't even get to the championship game. Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, is out recruiting, out developing, and out playing you on the football field. I don't understand it. I mean, I've watched football since I was born. I got podcasts. We come on here, talk all the time. I have no answer for you on why that is the case there. All that talent, man. They've had the number 1 recruiting class in the conference 4 years since 2016, and they've been in the top 2 every year. They had 2 all Big 12 players, just 2 that out of the whole team, and they lost games to TCU, who has dominated them since joining the Big 12. They've won like 9 out of like 10 games since they've joined the conference. Oklahoma, big brother in that rivalry now. And Iowa State beat them this year too. And I would say, personally, Iowa State is a better program than Texas right now. And as a kid, I would never think I would ever say that. I don't think a lot of average fans would disagree with me when I say that either, is they're just a better program right now. And you're finishing 4th in the conference, man. 4th. You aren't even top 3 at this point. It should be an indictment on every player, every coach, every administrator, anyone who makes decisions at Texas should be indicted. I mean, they had the most experienced quarterback in the entire country in the entire Power 5 coming back in Sam Ehlinger. They had a 5-star number 1 rated running back coming in this year who they didn't start till midway through the season. Then they had the best rated O-line in their conference. They had the best edge defender in the conference and the most money and support of anyone in the Big 12. And you can't get me more than a 4th place finish. I know it sounds tough, but I got to expect more from that. Steve Sarkisian, great hire. A+ hire this offseason out of Alabama. They needed to let go of Herman. I said that last year. They should have let him go a year earlier than a year late. I think he's going to have a lot to work to do to change the culture of Texas, because I don't think it's a player problem. They got the talent. I don't think it's a money or support problem. They got the most in the country. It's right up there with Alabama, Oregon, Clemson, whoever you want to go look at. Texas can rival the money and support in that area. They have to look deep inside and what they're doing wrong in that program. And so I'm really interested to see how Steve Sarkisian does there. And for a player, man, and listen, I also want to say I don't like coming off as someone who critiques players, but as an analyst, we have to give our honest opinion on how they played. Chuba Hubbard, listen, I can't go out there and play running back for Oklahoma State, but I think I might be able to do that. That was a tough. I mean, this kid was a Doak Walker Award winner, led the country last year with over 2,000 rushing yards, above Jonathan Taylor, who we just saw dominate at Wisconsin. This kid couldn't get me 600 yards rushing this year. His streak of 100-yard games ended week 1 against Tulsa. And it just never. LD Brown, the backup running back, outplayed Chuba Hubbard this year. And then you have one of your conference rivals in Barisi Hall straight take all the spotlight away from you and take all the shine. And then he opts out at the end of the season. I mean, I get the opt-outs before the season, but just because you're not playing well isn't a reason to opt out, in my opinion. And I think that Oklahoma State program, and we talked on the Big 12 preview about how much potential they had, but also how it could be very, very volatile given everything that happened with Mike Gundy.
Yep.
I think it went more the volatile way, man. There was a lot of players that underperformed this year. Spencer Sanders, Tylan Wallace, Chuba Hubbard. That O-line was horrible, man. I have no doubt me and you could have been a starting O-lineman at this year. They were bad. But Mike Gundy lost that team at some point, man.
Yeah.
And you saw that Tylan Wallace quit on the team at halftime of their bowl game. He played the first half and came out the tunnel in street clothes and said, yeah, I just decided to opt out. You had players opting out at halftime of a game, and you're playing a pretty good team in Miami. It's a big bowl game. Miami, Oklahoma State was an exciting bowl game. You were in that game. It was a one-score game, and you had your best player at that time opt out in the middle of the game. The disappointment could be the entire Oklahoma State program, but if you're a 2,000-yard rusher, you got to give me more than 600 yards of production. And his average carry went down from like 7 yards a carry to down almost to 3. So it was a combination of O-line, no quarterback, Mike Gundy being a volatile head coach. But as much as I hate it, man, Chuba Hubbard had to go here. And he went from a potential number 1 running back in this draft class to maybe not even being in the top 5 now, especially after what happened out at UNC with them 2 boys who absolutely put on a performance.
Yeah. And you know what's funny, like you were saying, and even in the preview, we were really high. You were really high on Chuba Hubbard and Oklahoma State because, like you said, it can go either way. And, you were really leaning towards, hey, I think this can go right. This can, this could be a situation where, like winning can kind of mend all the, divisiveness of this team and kind of become like that. What they say, deodorant is the greatest as far as, as far as the cover of the odor and everything. It's the greatest, with that is concerned. But yeah.
And it did. If you remember, they were 5th in the country at one point and then lost to Texas, and we didn't hear a peep. Everyone was happy. Everyone was quiet. And as soon as they lost that game to Texas and they started tripping down the line of their schedule, players started opting out. Chuba Hubbard wasn't happy. Tylan Wallace wasn't happy. So, and like you said, as soon as they started sweating a little bit and that deodorant wore off, it became ugly. And I still think they should have moved on from Gundy. And listen, I don't think he'll leave. We all saw what Tony Elliott said about Clemson, that he isn't going to leave. Next year, if Mike Gundy does not perform, you got to let him go. And I think they got to go after Tony Elliott hard. I think Tony Elliott at Oklahoma State would be an amazing hire. He's got the offensive mind to compete with Oklahoma, and he's an elite recruiter that can compete with Lincoln Riley, and he's young. He's energetic. He can connect with the recruits. I still, to this day, man, even months later, hashtag Tony Elliott to Oklahoma State needs to happen.
Yeah. And, you started it. You talked about that in August. The hashtag has got to be started, and it's got to be, it's got to go through the it has had some impressions and the algorithm has to get a hold of that as well.
Yes.
So, what to look for in 2021 in this conference?
Man, if I had to give it a title, if I was writing like a blog post or a book, it's got to be Oklahoma, Iowa State versus everybody. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be a bloodbath in this conference. And you look at Oklahoma and what they return. They're right up there with Iowa State. They're returning the 18, 19 starters. They got a bunch of people coming back. You got Spencer Rattler, who was a true freshman, coming back in. You saw how he clicked last season down the stretch. You see Iowa State coming back with Brock Purdy, Barisi Hall, Mike Rose potentially, Greg Eisworth at safety. These guys have so much potential. And, I've released my preseason top 10. I have Oklahoma second over Clemson, Ohio State. Oklahoma is that good. And I was telling Brandon, my co-host, if there was ever a year Oklahoma could win the national championship, it's this year. This next year will be the best team Lincoln Riley's ever had. Over the Baker Mayfield team, over Jalen Hurts, over Kyler Murray. This team is going to be the best team in terms of defensive and offensive talent. Alex Grinch has done an excellent job with that defense finally. He's got his recruits in. He's got the scheme put in place. That team's going to be really, really good. I think another team to watch, Kansas State. I know I might have a little bias as I go here, but I'm really not a huge K-State fan. Auburn, I'll have a lot of bias when we do SEC, but K-State, I go here, so I kind of got like the inside tap on some of the players and everything. That team's going to be good. That team beat Oklahoma, and they were on the upswing. They were ranked, and then they lost their starting quarterback to injury. 3 starting offensive linemen, 2 starting defensive tackles. They're 3 starting defensive backs all to injury, like back-to-back weeks, and they ended up losing their last 5 games of the season with a true freshman quarterback. Skylar Thompson, the original starting quarterback, is coming back. Deuce Vaughn was the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, newcomer of the year. He's 5'7", but explosive. He's out of this world. They're returning a lot of secondary defenders, almost their entire secondary. K-State will be tough to watch. And I want to see what Texas does, man. What to look for in 2021, like everyone says, is Texas back? That's going to be a question until that program wins the national championship. Listen, Steve Sarkisian isn't going to have it there next year, guys. I already know some experts and stuff saying Texas is going to be back next year. If he gets Quinn Ewers to commit next year and come to Texas, in 2 to 3 years, they'll probably be a playoff contender. But next year, sadly, I do not think Texas will be back. But you already know it's going to be a storyline from now until that program finally is actually back.
Yeah, and like you said, Texas it used to be just that premier place, and it's just like you funny. It's almost like we talked about like recruiting wars. It used to be neck and neck with Oklahoma, and now Oklahoma's really has just as far as the production on the field, and like you said, Texas is the brand, and it's so weird. I was ready to say this, but more so, not a shameless plug, but actually unplugged. But they are, in our generation, they are like the blue bloods, So essentially,
yeah, they are.
And pun intended.
You're not wrong. I mean, Texas and USC. Yeah. I think we talked about USC last episode. Those blue bloods have to be good. You also look at Florida State, Texas, USC. These programs need to be good for college football to be at its peak. And if they're not good, college football suffers. And I think you see that the Big 12, when Matt Brown was there and they were winning national championships, competing every year, the Big 12 wasn't looked at as a weak conference. It was looked at as one of the premier conferences. When USC was out there smacking people by 35 a game with Reggie Bush and them boys, the Pac-12 wasn't looked at in the same light as it is today. And if you have USC and Texas and Florida State back up to full strength, I don't think this narrative that the SEC is better is there, because look at the ACC. You got UNC on the come up. You got Florida State back to being good. Miami's going to be on the come up. You already got Clemson. And so you got those 4 teams competing. In the Pac-12, we talked about Oregon and where they're at. Then you'll have USC, Arizona State, and Utah are both on the come up. I think we need those blue bloods to step up and be better. And then you look at the Big 12, Iowa State, TCU, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Texas, Texas Tech. These conferences aren't as weak as people are saying, but because those name brand schools aren't there to pull in those average viewers, you got a bunch of people who don't watch big. I tend to ask this because our podcast, me and Brandon are both from Alabama, so we have a strong listening base in the South. So when we have fans interact with us and they say SEC dominance, I always ask them, how many Iowa State games did you watch this year? And the answer is none, almost every time. Or if they watch one, it was the Oklahoma game. in the Big 12 championship. And you asked him, when's the last time you watched an Oregon game? Oh, I don't stay up that late. I don't watch Pac-12 after dark. And it's like, you can't have an opinion on the SEC being the best conference if you don't watch these teams play.
Right.
You can't just look at the box score and get a feel for how good that team is. Because if you looked at the box score, you would think Iowa State got smacked by Louisiana Lafayette, and they didn't. Or if you looked at Iowa State versus Oklahoma, where they only won by 6 or 7 points, Iowa State dominated that game. But if you just look at the box score, you say, oh, they got lucky. They only won by 1 score, even though Barisi Hall ran for 200 yards on them. So I think more people got to get out and watch more average college football. And if those blue blood teams are there, they'll tune in and watch those average teams play.
Yeah, it'll be the draw, and that's one thing too, where especially when you look at when it's all said and done with like the committee in the college football playoff, that's what's driving it. That's why you see the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Clemson's all every year, because like you're saying, the disparate, the kind of how the other Power 5 conferences, they're average. They don't really have pretty much a definitive, like you said, like a USC, which is like dominated the conference. Texas back in the day, like with Vince Young and all those guys, Colt McCoys. You don't have that now, because people. It's funny because everybody always rooting for the underdog, but they do in the regular season. But when it comes to these national playoffs, I doubt if you would have put Coastal Carolina or Liberty in there, how many people would have watched that?
Not many. I mean, it was already down this year because everyone thought Alabama and Clemson were going to run through people, and they didn't watch. And I felt the same way about. I mean, we'll get more into it, I'm sure, in the ACC preview. Trevor Lawrence won the ACC Player of the Year award. The fact that wasn't given to Javonte Williams blows my mind. Yeah. The level of difficulty and the performance of Javonte Williams for me this year, he outplayed Trevor Lawrence in conference play. So he should have been the Offensive Player of the Year. But how many national pundits or average fans watched Javonte Williams play this year? I wouldn't imagine many. Or if they did, the one primetime game that y'all unfortunately had was the Notre Dame game, which they lost, or the Florida State game, which was the worst game I think UNC's had in the past 3 years. Right. And they didn't watch the Miami game where Javonte Williams and Michael Carter are running for 400 yards on a team that almost made a New Year's Six Bowl. It's just the inconsistency, man, and it bothers me so much about people not paying attention to like these middle tier schools, and that's what got me about the playoff race, man. How many people watched the Cincinnati game this year and was telling experts that Cincinnati was overrated because they didn't have this or that? And it's like, you can't even name their starting quarterback. How do you know they wouldn't have made it in the playoffs? Desmond Ridder is a 2-time AAC Player of the Year. He's going to be fine. And that team was very, very good, and that's why they almost beat Georgia.
Yeah, and they should have beat Georgia.
Yes, they should have. That was a whole nother conversation. That hurt my heart, man.
Right. And that's the thing where you look at those type of situations where it's just like until the blue bloods rise again, that's when you can look at those prospective conferences and have more respect. And like you even so I know it's a trip.
It is, man.
Yeah. So that rounds out our Big 12 preview. So Zach, man, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find the Blue Bloods on Instagram at @_Blue Bloods, Twitter at @_Blue Bloods, YouTube, the Blue Bloods or the Blue Bloods CFB podcast. Podcast is available everywhere, guys. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, all that good stuff. You can just look us up, the Blue Bloods, and we should be the first one that pops up. So check us out along with Couch Coach, man. And I definitely appreciate you having me on here.
Absolutely. Definitely appreciate it. And, our Power 5 preview continues on Thursday night. Well, we'll be talking about arguably one of the best conferences in football, the Atlantic Coast Conference, in my wheelhouse. So
a lot of UNC talk on that one, so definitely tune in for that one.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely be, festive for the occasion. The Carolina gear might run a little rampant, so just Carolina blue attire on my end on Thursday night. So Thursday night, 8:00 Eastern time, 7:00 Central time. we'll be back and we'll be previewing the Atlantic Coast Conference, aka the ACC. So for Zach and for Couch, this has been this week. Well, not this week's, but this has been the Big 12 recap. We'll catch you guys on the next go round.